Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. I am Bill Lockwood. Today we're looking at the first pope. Actually, we're going to look at from a Roman Catholic historian himself, Ellies Du Pin, who was several centuries ago, who wrote a voluminous several-volume history of the Roman Catholic Church, and he shows us very plainly what is the history that in the early ages of the church there was absolutely no pope. That is something that I think is so important because we need to note that what has happened with the Roman Catholic Church is that it is an evolution, and I even say this, an apostasy from the New Testament. It is not New Testament doctrine. It is an evolution that took place over many different centuries before the first pope was installed. But as I was preparing even to come in here and to come into the studio and do this podcast, I just saw this article came out from the latest issue of Biblical Archaeology Review. It's a pretty interesting magazine, but it has here on page 24, the First Council of Nicaea. And I thought, this is exactly what we've been talking about on this program. Now, the reason that this is important is because I've written articles in a paper talking about the first pope. Peter wasn't the pope, so forth. And the Roman Catholic priest comes in and charges ahead and says that you can't say that, and tradition says he was, and all that kind of thing. And so I thought, we'll just do some more exposures of it because people need to know the truth. It is only the truth that sets you free. Back to the Biblical Archaeology Review magazine, the First Council of Nicaea says 1,700 years ago, more than 300 bishops and officials participated in the first ecumenical council of the Christian Church. It met between May and August 325 in the Byzantine city of Nicaea, which is now Iznik, northwestern Turkey, hence its traditional name, the First Council of Nicaea. The next line reads, the council was convoked by Emperor Constantine I, who was reigning from 306 to 337, to address the Arian controversy that threatened the unity of the early church. For Constantine, the church was a unifying force within his vast empire, and the doctrinal disputes threatened to undermine that unity as well as his secular authority. But the point that I wanted to make here simply is that is common history. That is simple history that anyone who does any historical studies understands to be the case, except if you're a Roman Catholic, they're going to tell you a falsified history, such as that Peter was the first pope, and that all of the councils, 7 major councils through the first 7 centuries or so, or even 14 centuries, all the major councils were called by the Roman Pope. That is a lie. That is absolutely not the case. They were called by the Roman Emperor, and here's an article that shows the first one was called by the Emperor. Why didn't the Roman Pope, the Roman Catholic Pope from Rome, call the council? Because there was no Pope. That's why. There was no Pope. There was no universal Pope. Now, from Ellies Du Pin, he points out, this is a Roman Catholic historian. Ellies Du Pin shows us very clearly what the truth is on this. He was in France, of course, in the 17th century, and he just wrote a great history regarding it. So first of all, here's from his book. The bishops of the great cities, he's speaking about early Christianity, had their prerogatives in ordinations, in councils, and as in civil affairs, men generally had recourse to the civil metropolis, so likewise in ecclesiastical matters. They consulted with the bishop of the metropolitan city. There were major metropolitan cities, as he goes on to say, but many people consulted with the metropolitan churches, that is, the large churches that are located in the cities. The churches of 3 principal cities of the world were looked upon as chief, and their bishops attributed great prerogatives to themselves. Now, this is Du Pin writing. He says they attributed the power and the prerogatives to themselves. First of all, the Church of Rome, he says, was founded by Peter and Paul, was considered as first, and its bishop as first amongst all the bishops of the world, yet they did not believe him to be infallible. This is Du Pin's writing. And though they frequently consulted him and his advice was of great consequence, yet they did not receive it blindfold and implicitly, every bishop imagining himself to have a right to judge in ecclesiastical matters. So observe this. The bishops of the principal cities attributed to themselves great prerogatives. And the bishops of Rome, Rome being, of course, the principal city of the Roman Empire until it moved later on to Constantinople, they considered themselves, that is the church or the bishops there, as the primary ones. But he goes on to tell us the ecclesiastical prerogatives were that the clergy had, even though they had prerogatives, claiming that they were the authoritative ones, they had no pay. How different is that from the Roman Catholic Church today, which is one of the richest institutions in the world? Quote, the clergy were not distinguished from others by any peculiar habits, but by the sanctity of their life and manners. They were removed from all kind of avarice and carefully avoided everything that seemed to carry the appearance of scandalous, filthy lucre. They administered the sacramental gratis. That is, it was free. They believed it to be an abominable crime to give or receive anything for a spiritual blessing. Tithes were not then appropriated to them, but the people maintained them voluntarily at their own expense. End of quote. So how do you like that? Du Pin points out very clearly, this is what the history shows us, that the Roman Catholic Church really had no foundation in the early centuries, but it was only now developing, and even the clergy had no pay. How did it get to be the way it is today? I ask people who are in the Roman Catholic Church, how did it get to be one of the richest organizations in the world? Well, more of that in a later podcast. Not only so, but Du Pin tells us they did not meddle in political affairs. Quote, the clergy were prohibited to meddle with any civil and secular affairs. They were ordained against their will and did not remove from one church to another out of a principle of interest or ambition. They were extremely chaste and regular. It was lawful for priests to keep the wives they had married before they were ordained. So here we have priests, supposedly. That's not a New Testament appellation, however, but this is Du Pin's writing. But they were married. They can keep their wives. They married them before they became a bishop, and there was no ecclesiastical establishment. They were not to meddle in political affairs. Number 4, the ecclesiastical discipline, however, was altered later. He tells us, after all, it must be confessed that the discipline of the church has been so extremely different and so often altered that it is almost impossible to say anything positively concerning it. End of quote. The discipline, that is, the organization, the governing, ordaining laws of the church. Now, you can find what guides the Roman Catholic Church today online, but they had no ecclesiastical discipline in the early days, none whatsoever. He said everything was so simple. And that's how matters stood at the end of the 3rd century. Now, number 5, the councils were not called by the Pope because there was no Pope, as he's going to go and show us in a few moments. That's what we noticed right here. The first one was in Nicaea, Bithynia, Turkey, 325 AD through 318 bishops. They were called by the Roman Emperor Constantine to settle discords, and it was, of course, on the Arian controversy, that is, the nature of Christ. Du Pin points out that by the 6th canon of this council, no pope was ever considered. No supreme head was yet ordained. Quote, the 6th canon, that would be from the Council of Nicaea, is famous for the several questions it has occasioned. The most natural sense that can be given to it is this: we ordain that the ancient custom shall be observed. Now, note carefully what he's about to say, which gives power to the bishop of Alexandria over all the provinces of Egypt, Libya, Pentapolis, because the bishop of Rome has the like jurisdiction over all subsidiary or suburbs region, and this addition must be supplied it says out of Rufinus or Rufinus, we would likewise have the rights and privileges of the church of Antioch and the other churches preserved. All right, let's just stop here for a moment. What has he said? He said the bishop of Alexandria, that would be in Egypt, is equal to what we have in Rome, so also in Antioch, that would be in Syria. And the other churches preserved. So here's Du Pin telling us the churches, the three primary churches are Alexandria, Rome, and Antioch, and they are co-equal. But these rights ought not to prejudice those of the metropolitans. That is, don't anybody else in these other towns get excited about this just because we turn to them for advice and what their judgments are on different matters that are come to dispute. So continue with Du Pin. If anyone is ordained without the consent of the metropolitan, the council declares that he is no bishop. But if anyone is canonically chosen by the suffrage of almost all the bishops of the province, and if there are but one or two of a contrary opinion, the suffrages of the far greater number ought to carry it for the ordination of those particular persons. This canon, being thus explained, has no difficulty in it. It does not oppose the primary or the primacy of the Church of Rome, but it does not, and here's Du Pin, these are Du Pin's words, it does not oppose the primacy of the Church of Rome, but it does not establish it. End of quote. How do you like that? Du Pin, a Roman Catholic historian, tells us that the Council of Nicaea did not establish the primacy of the Church of Rome. Did not establish the primacy of the Church. We see that already because it was called by Constantine. It was not called by the Pope. So the council is not called by the Pope, but the Emperor. The council does not establish the primacy of the Church of Rome. Then consider the early councils, other early councils. There was, once again, no supremacy given to the church at Rome. Du Pin again, quote, in this sense it is that it compares the Church of Rome to the Church of Alexandria by considering them all as patriarchal churches. It continues also to the Church of Antioch and all the other great churches whatsoever rights they could have had, or they could have. So notice once again, Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, those are the primary churches. And by the way, why would they be the primary churches? Well, number one, they were in major metropolitan centers of the Roman Empire. Number two, they were established by the apostles. At least we know of Antioch and Rome. And from extra biblical material, we learn about Alexandria, Egypt. But they were, of course, primary metropolitan churches. So that's how Du Pin explains all of it regarding the equality of these churches in the early ages. So Rome had no primacy. Now, he goes on to say there were four great political dioceses. These dioceses, I guess is what it is, dioceses, the four great political dioceses. This is, by the way, Roman government jurisdictional division. The Roman Catholic Church adopted, not from the Bible, but from Roman history and Roman political history, the jurisdictional divisions. So in the Roman jurisdiction, there were four great political dioceses, that is the political term. It was a political term. And to these, the church conformed. Hence, the patriarchal sees, that is the seats in Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria. So now we've added another one, Constantinople. In the process, Du Pin writes, of time, Jerusalem was added also. And these all became radiating centers of ecclesiastical power and patronage. The bishop of each of these dioceses assumed a sort of primacy in his own district. The Council of Nicaea decided that the same power should be given to them all and that all should be coordinate. Hence, Du Pin tells us there was no primacy for Rome, but we have Alexandria, Egypt, Antioch in Syria, Rome, and Constantinople, and they're all co-equal. Then we come to the Council of Chalcedon, 451 AD. Here we have the 5th century, and yet we still don't have the idea of a supreme head of the church. This is a Roman Catholic historian. That is to say, there is no primacy to the church at Rome. He quotes, or this is a quote from him rather, the 28th canon grants, that would be the Council of Chalcedon, grants to the church of the city of Constantinople, which is called New Rome, the same privileges with the old Rome, because this city is the second city in the world. It also adjudges to it, besides this, jurisdiction over the dioceses of Pontus, Asia, and Thrace, and over the churches which are out of bounds of the emperor, and a right to ordain metropolitans in the provinces of these dioceses. All right, so what has he said here? He said basically, even to the 5th century, there was no primacy of the church at Rome. There was no chair of Peter upon which a pope sat, universal that is, in the sense that he oversaw all of the churches, made rules, was infallible, and even called councils. There was nothing like that. This is exactly history. So the Council of Chalcedon had 340 bishops. It was in the year 451. It gave the same power to the Patriarch of Constantinople as to the Patriarch of Rome, and makes the supremacy of one equal to the supremacy of the other. Then all of the councils in the first 6 centuries, there were about 170 small metropolitan councils, but major councils, they promulgated about 1,400 canons, and of all the creeds that came out of the first 6 centuries of the church, there is not a single vestige of the existence of a pope or universal head of the church down to the time of Gregory the Great or John the Faster of Constantinople. There simply is not in history. But Roman Catholic historians want to trace back their history all the way to the chair of Peter in Rome, which did not exist, and history shows us that that is a fabrication. Now consider also the title Pope. The title Pope, in its peculiar and exclusive sense, was first assumed by the Patriarch of Constantinople. Not Rome, Constantinople. And it was approved by the Patriarch of Rome. Now this is going to get pretty interesting here, because we come now to Gregory in the 6th century, where we're about to find the first Pope, Boniface III, the first Pope in 606 AD. So this is the life of Gregory, written by Ellies Du Pin. Of Gregory, he said, he did often rigorously oppose the title of Universal Patriarch, which the patriarchs of Constantinople assumed to themselves. So say, okay, so Constantinople and the church there, the ecclesiastical assembly there, opposed the ecclesiastical assembly in Rome. The churches there opposed one another because they're in these great metropolitan centers. Gregory is in Rome, but now the patriarch in Constantinople, which he calls himself the patriarch, assumes to himself the title of pope. Gregory opposes it. He's in Rome. He says, I oppose it. He calls it proud, blasphemous, anti-Christian, and diabolical. Did you hear that? This is Gregory the Great, who's in the Catholic Encyclopedia as one of the great so-called popes. But he opposed it. He opposed the title being used by the Patriarch of Constantinople as proud, blasphemous, anti-Christian, and diabolical, because, not because he was already the Pope, but because he thought that that was now assuming to themselves too much power, too much authority, and we are all supposed to be co-equal. So he says the Bishop of Rome, even, this is Gregory now, refused to take this title upon themselves, lest they should seem to encroach upon the rights of other bishops. Oh, see, so many Roman Catholics might want to write in and say, well, the reason Gregory didn't want the Patriarch of Constantinople to assume the title of Pope was because he was the Pope. No, he didn't want it because that would encroach upon the rights of all the bishops, because they were all co-equal, and no one had a title of universal bishop or universal pope. So in 588 AD, Gregory the Great opposes the title of pope, and he shows the novelty of the idea of the universal head, father, pope, even at that time. Du Pin says, Saint Gregory does not only oppose this title in the Patriarch of Constantinople, but maintains also that it cannot agree to any other bishop, and that bishop of Rome neither ought nor can assume the title of Pope. But Patriarch of Constantinople was called John the Younger. John the Younger had taken upon himself this title in a council in 586 AD. That was in Gregory's time. It was in the time of Gelasius, which obliged this patriarch in Rome to annul the acts of the council. They didn't like it. So Gregory wrote of it also to this patriarch, but this made no impression on him. John would not abandon the title. So Gregory writes to John, says, you cannot take the title. It is blasphemous. It is anti-Christian. It's anti-scriptural. You can't take that kind of title. So Gregory addressed himself. When John didn't listen to this, John says, I'm going to do what I want to do over here in Constantinople. So Gregory now, isn't this something? This is vying for power. It's like reading between the Mussolinis and Hitlers of the world. Gregory now writes to Mauritius, who is the emperor of Rome, Mauritius. He exhorted him earnestly to employ his authority to redress this abuse and force John, who assumed the title, to stop it. He remonstrates with him in his letter, and although Jesus Christ, he said, committed to Peter the care of all the churches, yet he was not called universal apostle. That's what Gregory wrote. The title universal bishop is against the rules of the gospel and the appointment of the canons, that there cannot be a universal bishop, but the authority of all the others will be destroyed or diminished, Gregory said, if that occurs with John in Constantinople. And that if the bishop of Constantinople were a universal bishop, and it should happen that he should fall into heresy, it might be said that the universal church had fallen into destruction. Boy, wasn't he a prophet. That the Council of Chalcedon had offered this title to Leo earlier, but neither he nor his successors would accept it. This is what Gregory's writing. He said Leo was offered the title, but he would not accept it, lest by giving something peculiar to one bishop only, this should take away the rights which belong to all the bishops. That it belongs to the emperor to reduce by his authority him who despises the canons and does injury to the universal church by assuming a peculiar name, that is, of course, Pope. So what happened? Well, at this time, the patriarchs of Constantinople and Rome were contending for supremacy. And while it appeared to Gregory that his rival of the East was likely to possess the title, he saw in it everything anti-Christian and profane. However, things changed very rapidly. A new dynasty ascended the throne, and that dynasty was a general in Mauritius' army by the name of Phocas, P-H-O-C-A-S. Phocas became, now by murder, took out Mauritius, now became the emperor of New Rome in Constantinople, and Gregory recognized him as the emperor, legitimate, even though he was a murderer, and Phocas in turn entitled Gregory's successor as Pope. And that man's name was Boniface III, and that was in 606 AD. The first pope was crowned in 606 AD. And that is how Louis Ellies Du Pin, Roman Catholic historian, as well as you can read it in many different histories, that's exactly what happened. Peter was not a pope. The Roman Catholic Church is built upon a tissue of lies and fabrications. No, the Bible is very clear. Every congregation is self-autonomous, self-governing, overseen by elders, plural. There is never one pastor. There's never one person over the church. There are elders, and each congregation is self-autonomous, self-governing. There is no universal church organization in the New Testament. There's a universal church, but not a universal church organization. This is the grand apostasy that we've talked about, where we have Boniface III being titled Pope in 606, that Paul talked about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We'll have more in a later podcast.